And many thanks to Muftar for bringing us the latest in sports. But it's time now to get into some of the stories we've been bringing to you so far here on the AM show. And one has got to do with the latest development on the African continent, talking about that shocking surprise by the armed forces in Gabon. They've seized power, deposing the country's president, Ali Bongo, which is now putting an end to an era, as some experts are calling it. There are also concerns about why the continent continues to experience a sharp rise in military takeovers in the last few years. We're fortunate to be joined now by Professor Kwesi Ening, who's at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Center, joining us for a brief conversation on this latest that we're learning of. And Prof, it's not really a good time, an exciting time to be talking to you, obviously, because just the other day we're talking about Niger, it was Mali before then, Burkina Faso, and now here we are again talking about another African country experiencing military takeover. How do we put an end to this, really?
I don't think we are going to put an end to it. I think what we should be asking ourselves really is, where will be the next, and probably the next two coup d'etats. Look, this is not rocket science. Basic forecasting and risk analysis will show you, can clearly point out where the next one is going to come from. There is a reluctance by us as Africans to call a spade a spade. When you have forms of governance that are corrupt, competent, that seeks to basically just hang on to power, you create the fundamentals or the foundation for these changes to take place. Gabon is a very interesting case. 56 years in power by the same family, a president who was so disastrously sick and unwell that he could barely walk. Okay? So even if in Gabon, his own political elites could not force him to resign, because in almost all constitutions, when you are fiscally incapable of delivering on your mandate, you have to step aside. Okay? But one also expects the African Union to have sent a delegation of leaders. And look, our dear brother, maybe for the sake of your people, stand aside. Okay? Sovereignty is important, but sovereignty must be responsible. We cannot use the sovereignty debate by our heads of states to say, hey, well, Gabon is a sovereign state, so we cannot go in to talk. That was the essence of the African peer review mechanism, in which our peers would be able to advise, to nudge, to encourage, so that leaders will do what is right. That seems to have fallen in our abeyance.
The expectation was that mechanism would at least help to bring some standards onto the continent by telling ourselves what we want and how we want to approach our democracy. But what we have, and that's the criticism from some, is that we're just diluting the standards. We're not telling each other as we should.
No, we are not too good at telling each other what we should. What we are seeing is a sort of a heads of states club that makes the rules and the regulations, but the rules and the regulations do not concern them. So I'm right now at a meeting on silencing the guns, which is an African Union initiative that has been established since 2013. And the deadline keeps on being pushed and pushed and pushed, because those who are signatory to that document themselves do not believe in it. So the peer review mechanism that ought to have brought leaders to check on each other simply does not work again. So I can reel about 5 countries that are on the verge of even deeper political and military upheavals. But our leaders are just silent. Okay? The union is silent. And when you have those who govern in their 70s and 80s, ruling very young people who feel excluded, who have lost hope, who do not see any opportunities for improving their livelihoods, then the military option, which is very unfortunate, becomes the only option that is available. Let us be fair enough to ourselves and to say, time is up. We cannot deliver. It's time for us to leave so we can bring these coup d'etats to an end. Otherwise, the continent is going to face yet another decade of military coups, of counter coups, and of more violence, leading to underdevelopment, leading to deeper poverty and the lack of jobs, health, education.
This will certainly take us 3 decades back, knowing what happened in the 70s. But it's also about decisive leadership and the ability of the continental body, the African Union, to deal with this. But we're not seeing that. My good friend Ike Bensa likes to take it this way, that we'll see a textbook approach towards dealing with this. Call a summit, suspend Gabon from the African Union, get the sub-regional body to do the same within the Central African Republic, African region. And then the next thing is to begin to engage the military regime. How else do we need to approach these, coup d'etats, and how do we handle the militaries that are taking over power?
No, we can't handle and we can't order the militaries because our multilateral institutions are failed in their primary responsibilities of ensuring that sovereignty is responsible, that sovereignty creates legitimacy, that sovereignty does not begin to be used as a buzzword for simply just hanging on to power. The African Union has a reel of normative frameworks around unconstitutional changes of government. Now, Mr. Bongo and his family alone have governed for 56 years. Okay, the union has kept quiet. They've changed their constitutions. They've murdered people. They've intimidated the media. They've intimidated the judges. The union was quiet throughout all this. Now, when our multilateral institutions that we have voluntarily signed on to become members are incapable of applying their own rules that they have set for themselves, then the efficacy and the usefulness of those organizations begin to be questioned. And I think the African Union has a very difficult uphill task to convince the people of Gabon when it comes reading some dusty documents. It is not that easy. Both ECOWAS and the African Union are losing credibility, and their actually continued survival is actually at risk right now because their empirical usefulness or utility for this continent is at a very low place. They have not done.
The question about the implication for not just Africa, but even what that will feed to the West Africa sub-region has come up. Many saying that this might radicalize the entire sub-region, knowing that already we have about 4 of our territories under military rule. The fear is that more and more persons or in the military might be radicalized to do the same within the West Africa sub-region. You have the likes of Senegal having their own challenges. The president there attempting to run for a 3rd term. It's also sparking lots of tension within the country as well. Do you feel that there's a direct implication for the West Africa sub-region, just knowing that, well, it's in Central Africa, by the way?
Well, I mean, the essence of being a member of a multilateral institution is that those institutions can serve as checks and balances on how states behave and can moderate state behavior to ensure that they comply with the rules that they have set for themselves. We saw how Mr. Bongo, in his wobbly state, fidgeted with the constitution, people drummed and danced, and we are seeing Macky Sall deliberately manipulating the process, okay, in which he claimed that he's not running for a 3rd term, but the opposition leader has been thrown into jail, the opposition party banned, and ECOWAS is quiet, and the African Union is quiet. Okay, now, when these institutions cannot moderate the behavior of Mr. Macky Sall and something happens in Senegal, then they do not have the moral authority to come and read the normative frameworks. And we are seeing a similar tendency happening also in Cameroon. Okay, so our institutions have a critical role to play in helping to prevent these excesses that lead to military rule. Militaries take up guns long, way after the coups have taken place. Okay, way after civilians in power have manipulated constitutions, been corrupt, undermined, public processes, and basically hollowed out the state. When it happens that then coups have already taken place, the military only uses a gun to give it the final.
There's no alternative to democracy. What's your take on that?
Well, I think my take is that we need hybrid forms of democracy in which we bring some of our traditional institutions back to play a critical role. Chieftains, women's groups, youth groups. The democracy that has been handed to us does not speak to our lived experiences. It doesn't speak to our reality. If you look at the African Union's governance architecture, it doesn't speak to our lived reality. We need to be bold enough to say what works for us. Let's sit around the table, let's have a conversation, and then let's come to some conclusions and some decisions where we do things and establish the systems that work for us as best as possible.
Okay, and now we're looking forward to, the issues that may come out of this coup. Obviously, the military will form their new regime, and the question about how long is too long for a military regime to say. We've seen the decision or the announcement from the military junta in Niger promising to return the country to constitutional order in the next 3 years. The fear is that will be the same thing for this regime. Is it not the case that simply we're seeing the military have more and more taste to control political power?
Look, when those who lead have not read the document upon which they seek to engage a recalcitrant regime, and here I'm talking about the ECOWAS case, behaves in such a way that it locks itself into a corner where it does not have any wriggle, then you actually hand over power to the military regime that you ought to have sought behavioral changes. It is ECOWAS's, misreading of the Niger case that has brought about these tensions. So yes, in Gabon, the African Union will continue talking, but they will agree to some transition period because the African Union does not have the moral standing and the moral authority to issue instructions to anybody in Gabon because they kept quiet, they whined and dined with Bongo, even when he was doing the wrong thing. And they realized the responsibility for our organizations to do what is right. These organizations are not decorative organizations. They must be seen to be applying the normative frameworks about how, constitutional forms of government must be run, the role of independent judiciaries, electoral commissions, role of the free media. These are contested and contentious issues and processes. But it is a learning process also. ECOWAS and African Union have failed their member states, have failed the country. It's most important.
It's stoking the continental debate once more. President Akufo-Addo has commented on that before. He's even proposed it to the West Africa Sub-Regional Body, ECOWAS, for the consideration of a framework or a treaty on term limits. But sovereignty comes in the way almost all the time when that conversation comes up. Looking at what's happening in Gabon now, 56 years, one family controlling, an entire generation, if I should say. You have similar incidents, for instance, in the neighboring Republic of Togo, where you have one family reigning for that long. How do we juxtapose the conversation of sovereignty and having a continental framework that will enforce term limits?
No, I think the continental framework already has the term limits in there. But the discourse around sovereignty is that sovereignty must be perceived as responsibility. Sovereignty is not a term that we simply fling around without the responsibilities that come with it. The legitimacy that comes out of being a sovereign nation is that you are responsible to the needs of your citizens. And it is this interlinkage between international norms around sovereignty, the domestic imperatives of responsibility that brings about legitimacy. Bongo lost legitimacy long ago. The African Union failed in confronting him to say enough is enough. So if we want to bring sovereignty to the center of the debate as responsibility, as delivering public welfare goods, as protecting citizens, then we need to ensure that the ECOWAS and the African unions on this continent also play their role. They are able to hold these governments to account. Because immediately we fail to do that, and with the demographic imperatives, then the shifts and the shaking of our societies will mean that the military will continue to step.
And one unique trend, and one unique trend we seem to be, seeing all throughout the recent coup d'etats across the continent is the manner in which, or if you want to call it the modus operandi of the military this time round. No bloodshed, quote unquote. There's no casualty when it comes to the health and safety of the incumbent president who's been deposed. And then you seem to have public support, either natural, organic, or inorganic, whichever way you describe it, for the military regime that's taking over power. Is this not a bait, just leading us gradually to that cliff where we may eventually fall off if care is not taken?
No. I think we shouldn't make it that complicated. Why do people seek political office? You seek political office because you think you have something in your arsenal to transform people's lives and to have a positive impact on people's lives. So this is a contestation between different forms of government or different forms of governance. Now, when you have a youthful population who are excluded from the positive fruits of democratic governance, of economic growth, of high unemployment, then you have the underpinnings of those who support any form of change. And if you listen to the narratives from extremist groups, those narratives are tapping into the unemployment, the lack of schools, the lack of training opportunities, and are creating this hope that, look, were we to come, we will be able to satisfy your needs. We know they will not be able to satisfy those needs. But politics is about tapping into that vein of frustration and turning that frustration to create a support base. And that is what the military has been very successful in doing in Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and now in Gabon. And then 2 more countries are just in the queue to experience a similar thing.
And when you say 2 more, you're referring to?
That I will keep under my belt for now.
I hope you're not picked up by national security, but anyway, it's too early for that to start happening this morning. Grateful that you've been able to spend some time with us this morning, Professor Kwesi Aning, at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Center.